to After Dark. I'm Nic Pegg, and joining me on the line we have Kim Odering for this week's edition of In the Garden. Good evening, Kim.
Good evening, Nick. How are you today?
I'm very good. You've just back from a trip to Australia.
Yes, it was lovely. Had a wonderful time seeing a friend and looking at the plants over there. We went to a couple of garden centres over there, and crikey, I think we've got more variety than they have. Let's put it that way. Just about anything grows over there, but we've got the variety here.
Now, amongst other things, this evening you wanted to have a talk about potting, indoors and outdoors.
Yes. I do want to have a talk about potting up indoors and outdoors. But first of all, what I'd like to say to the listener out there is that, and it was something that I thought about not so long ago, and because we are now transitioning from winter into spring, we go to the garden centre, and if you see pots of colour there, so only ever go to the garden centre, get pots of colour, which are about $2.99 or whatever. They could just little like violas, pansies, primulas, polyanthus, and you'll also have still winter stock on their shelves. There's really no need to plant it unless you need instant colour for an event. I think that people should be aware that they really shouldn't plant that sort of thing now, but unless it's polyanthus and primula that you'll buy now cheap to summer over, because they won't get much more flowering out of those, just another couple of months, maybe even a month, 2 months maybe. And violas and pansies you can buy in pots of colours because they'll probably flower up till Christmas. But otherwise, through the heat of the summer months, you use your marigolds, petunias, impatiens, lovely colourful bedding plants. That stock won't be out on sale yet for probably another month, or at least if it is, it shouldn't be. Garden centres do tend to bring out their stock relatively early, and that's what I want to talk to them too about tomato plants. By the end of this month, beginning of next month, they'll start seeing tomatoes come out into garden centres. Don't get them if you're planning on growing them outside. There's no point at all. Our night temperatures are too cool, and we need the longer daylight hours for them as well. So here in Christchurch, in the south, you wouldn't plant tomatoes until I wouldn't even plant them until around about end of October, November. So colourful bedding plants, no need to plant them now unless you've got an event, and then buy the pots of colour. Or if you want to buy them as the garden centres are selling out their winter stock to summer over, like pollies and what have you. And then you'd put them in shady areas and you'll get flower out of them next year again. I'd wait now for your summer stock, for your spring and summer stock.
Now, with regard to the potting, it's quite possible to water your plants too much, isn't it?
Totally. Most cause of death for plants, particularly for indoor plants, is overwatering or underwatering. And what I want people to know is that there's no such thing as a house plant. What they are is tropical plants. So your palms, your sansevieria, which is mother-in-law's tongue, wouldn't need too much water. But what tends to happen is, quite rightfully so, people put trays underneath them to catch the water, and what happens is that the plant is left sitting in a tray of water. The plant keeps on sucking up the water, and the soil gets saturated, and in winter, particularly in homes, the night temperatures are still quite low. So the plant is now wet and cold, and so then you will start having some backward movement of that plant. The other thing is underwatering. So whether the plants are in pots outside or in pots inside, you really should take them off the trays, give them a really good soaking, and allow the water to drain away before putting them back on their trays inside. If they're outside and they're in 60-litre pots or bigger pots, you need to give it good 10 litres during your hot summer days. But again, from now until those hot summer days arrive, probably about once a week would do it, but you need to give them a good 10 litres. Let the hose run into them and let it drain right through. If it's an indoor plant, take it outside, let the water drain, fill it up, let the water drain right through, and then put it back on its tray once it's stopped dripping.
I think I've seen products, Kim, where you can add it to the soil or to the potting mix, and it helps hold the water for longer. Is that right?
Yes, that's true, and it's a wetting agent, what they call a wetting agent. Wetter soil is one that actually looks like a sawdust, actually, and I use that. But when you first pot up your plants, which you should be looking, if you're needing to upsize your pots for your plants now, you need to pot them now. You need to use a growing medium. For goodness sake, don't use soil out of the garden and then think you can boost it up with plant food. That's you know, I haven't seen it once, I've seen it 100 times. No, use a growing medium. Now, that's your potting mix or your shrub and tub mix from garden centres. Now, garden centres will have a seed raising mix, which carries quite a lot of peat in it. A potty mix which carries a little more peat than the shrub and tub, which will carry more of a bark sand sawdust sort of mix. That's all designed for optimum growing for particular plants. So seedlings need more peat, and the peat helps keep the moisture in the soil. But look, once so so the shrub and tub that has a freer draining mix. But these are growing mediums. They're put together specifically for different types of potting situations. Now, if you let that dry out too much, what happens is that the soil builds up electrodes around the soil, and you'll have noticed sometimes, I mean, I think we've all faced it from one time to another. If you water your plant, you think it's had the water, but you scratch under the surface and it's as dry as a bone. So that's what happens, and that's when you need a wetting agent. Pots outside, you might not want to pot them every year if they are a more permanent planting, such as, in my case, I have got Japanese maples and pots that have been there for 10 years. Well, I'm going to repot them this year, but I'm going to cut them back, reduce the top and reduce the root ball, and plant them back into a growing medium in a slightly larger pot.
Kim, I was going to ask you about that. What are the signs that you need to go to a bigger pot and, the plant just needs more room for its roots?
Oh, well, you just, so my plants, say, if we take my plants, for example, which have been in these pots for 10 years, you'll notice, what happens is you notice that the plant, you can never get enough water into it. It starts going backwards. You will get dieback in it. It will start just moving backwards. When I repot these, because I'm going to have to break most of the pots around mine because they've been put into earthenware pots. I'll have to break the pots. I'll reduce the top by about half of the plant, and I'll reduce the root because mine are thoroughly root bound. I've almost pretty much bonsai'd them, if you like. But when I repot, if I want any more growth out of them now, I'm going to have to chop off some of the root. And when you chop off some of the root, you have to reduce the top. Very hard to talk about it over a radio show. I often like to show people what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this.
When you pull the plant out of the pot, and do you need to loosen the earth that's become compacted around the roots with a wee hand fork or something?
Well, I train people. I've got a young lass working under me at the moment, and she's quite horrified by how I will actually rip into a root ball of a plant. Sometimes yes, I'd say, sometimes no. My plants in these pots are going to require reducing of the root, and in so doing, reducing of the top. I'm going to have to break them out of their pots, because if I just tried to pull them out, it would damage the tree. Be a bit like having your feet anchored to the ground and a crane trying to pull you up from the top. So it actually breaks the damages the roots and breaks the stem or the trunk from the roots. So I've often seen people come back because they haven't dealt with it properly. So, and if it's in a plastic pot, it's often easier to get out. Say when you buy a plant from a garden centre, you should tip the pot upside down, supporting the plant with one hand underneath. So you've tipped the pot upside down, you've got a hand underneath the pot, and your fingers around the stems of the plant, and you just tap it onto a shelf or a nearby table or something or other, and then your plant should come out quite easily. Failing that, you can put it on the ground and roll it or cut the pot off it. I've seen people do a lot of damage to plants by trying to just rip them out of their pots by their tops. Yeah, it's a big no-no in our industry that you do that.
Just one last question now, Kim, because we're nearly out of time. Right. When you break the crocks because you've got to break them because the roots have grown into the pot, is it safe to reuse the broken up crock for as drainage in the bottom of a new one, or could it disease the plant?
No, I wouldn't say that it would disease the plant. I don't really ever put broken pots or even stones in the bottom of my pots, because I always buy pots with good drainage holes. If I had a pot without good drainage holes and say it has no holes at all, I'd be either looking to drill holes in it or use a plant that doesn't mind getting its feet a little wetter, because pots they need drainage holes. The water needs to drain. If I've got broken crockery in the bottom of a fairly large pot, and I put a plant and repot a plant into it, it would have to be a plant that its root system I knew didn't reach to the bottom of that pot, because that's where all the dregs of water would be. So it's not very good. I do have one pot like that, and I put a willow in it. There you go.
Now we've got a question. We have a question from a viewer actually, so we'll finish on this one. She's got a lemon tree in a 60-litre tub, and she's wondering, it's only 2 years old though, does she need to prune the lemon tree at 2 years old?
Well, I would say not if it's a nice shape. Has it been in the tub for 2 years? Because if it has been in the tub for 2 years, is it doing well? If it's not doing... Citrus fruit need really large pots to get a crop off it. For any length of time, a crop for any length of time. So my lemon tree, for instance, is in a 100-litre pot. This lady should feed and water her plant and do it as I've suggested doing it. Feed it 3 times through the season with a Tribond fertiliser. Oderings have one called Replenish. Another quite a good one, if you don't do that, is Nitrofosca. Nitrofosca is pretty good. If you use Osmocote, you have to make sure it's covered, otherwise the capsules release to the air. So this lady, if it's a nice shape, don't bother. Lemon trees will usually keep themselves in a nice, tidy shape. However, you should be using winter oil on it now if you've got sooty mildew, in order to break up that sooty mildew and smother any insects before the heat comes on in the summer. Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty thorough diagnosis for you, Kim Odering. Thank you so much for the segment this week, and we look forward to hearing your segment in the garden again next week. Thanks, Kim.
All right, thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good night to you. Right, we'll take a very short break now, and we're back with Catherine Chu. She's Independent Citizens candidate for Riccarton here on After Dark.